Welcome to Simply Why, a podcast about money and purpose, where we pull back the curtain on running a financial advisory business focused on providing intentional advice to couples and families. I'm Dennis Morton.
And I'm Katie Brown. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in.
We are the co-founders of Morton Brown Family Wealth. Been a good 6 years, Katie.
Yes, absolutely. And it flies.
Is it moving?
Yes.
Well, they say that it's like parenting. The days drag, the years fly.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty extraordinary to think of the ebbs and flows of the markets, the ebbs and flows of our team, and all the life and all the stuff that's transpired in 6 years to end up in a pretty good spot.
Yes. You know what? I love that you brought up the kids, because I think it's fascinating to think about where we were when we launched this business, where our kids were, but also our staff.
Mhm.
The families have grown, and we get to witness awesome milestones in their lives too, now that we're getting kind of more time under our belt, and just the relationship building internally has been really cool.
Yeah, it is. This is like the spring of benchmarks, or of milestones. We have a couple of graduations and sacraments and other stuff going on. It's like one party after another, and we'll mix in a little Morton Brown party later on in the month to celebrate or something.
Yeah, we'll need to do that.
So we were at the Future Proof Retreat, a conference out in Colorado Springs. Really intimate conference, only about 500 advisors, which is small compared to some of the other ones that we go to, but focused on the leaders of advisory firms and the kinds of conversations they're having. And to tie it in with like what we've learned in 6 years, the kinds of things the environment that we're working in, we learned some pretty interesting insights about this environment that we launched Morton Brown into 6 years ago and how quickly it's changing. Talk about the conversation that we had at the Future Proof Retreat.
Sure. So the retreat, which was wonderful, by the way, Advisor Circle did a fantastic job in putting the retreat together and really curating, like you said, a group of leaders throughout the country to create a space where we can have collaborative conversations. But it was kicked off with the initial presentation was Mark Hurley. And Mark recently wrote, it was actually an update to a previous white paper that he had written, but he wrote the white paper, Welcome to the Jungle. And it talks about the advisory industry in kind of across the board, recognizing where things are at now, where we've come from, but what the future may hold for the world that we work in every day. And some of the highlights from his conversation and from the white paper, interestingly enough, we had seen this white paper and we kind of dissected it previous to the conference, but it was just fascinating to hear the updates and his take on it in person. But a lot of the things that he talked about was how we've kind of hit this stagnation a little bit in the financial industry. We've moved to this AUM model, just assets under management model, where you charge a fee for assets under management. It's no longer, I shouldn't say no longer because it still exists, but it's not as heavily commission based. And through that process, you start to receive some reoccurring income. And I think a lot of advisors have been kind of, as he said, lulled to sleep.
A little bit.
And a lot of the growth that's been happening inside of our world has been market driven, not as much growing by way of serving new families, new clients, walking in through the door. He really kind of like broke down what the advisory landscape looks like and what it will look like in the near term. What were some of the things that jumped out to you, Dennis?
I mean, some of the numbers he threw out there were pretty staggering. So going back 15 years, we've had a pretty staggering bull market over that period of time. We had a couple, the pandemic in 2022 was not fun, but look at asset prices, whether it's stocks, bonds, or otherwise, and they've grown dramatically, which means that those asset-based revenues have grown dramatically. But he said if you strip out market performance, 70% of all firms are shrinking.
Shocker. That's huge.
Yep. And we know that because we encourage our clients to spend their money. This is why you have it. So there's money going out all the time. And if you're not growing, if you're not adding new households, take out the market performance, people are shrinking. The other thing he said that in recent years, revenues have doubled at advisory firms, staffing levels have remained static. So you have more people, bigger consequences, more assets that they own, but the industry is not invested in the people needed to serve those clients. And that's a big, big challenge facing the industry right now.
Yes. Now, I do think that technology has helped to streamline some processes, But we've talked about it before. You still need that advisory relationship. You need that person that's read in on your financial plan, that knows your investments, that understands all the financial facets in your life. And for too many advisors, they have too many clients to really stay on top of that, and they don't have the full support in place to be able to proactively service all of those clients. So I'm not surprised at all that staffing has stayed the same while other things have grown.
And that's only the leading edge of it. He also said that one third of all financial advisors are expected to retire in the next 10 years. There's only going to be more retirees and more need for people to have financial plans put together, and to cut the headcount by a third as that demand is increasing when we already haven't staffed. He's just started to paint pretty well. It could be seen as a bleak picture if you're not positioned correctly. But we were actually heartened because there's some of the things that we saw as both risks and opportunities when we founded Morton Brown, that he then turned around and said, but if you're doing these things, these are the kind of attributes that are going to define success from here on out that might not have defined the success of the last 10 years or so.
Right. And we'll highlight some of those items that he had brought up to say, all right, A, B, C, D things going forward will help you be successful in this next wave. I think something else, though, kind of before we move on to the next step, is to mention how much M&A activity, mergers and acquisition, how many transactions have happened in recent years. And I mean, there has just been a boom of transactions for a number of different reasons. And I think that the environment has been supportive of that. For a long time, we had low interest rates. We had, as you mentioned, we had a lot of growth in the stock market, a lot of liquidity, a lot of cash out there that made it possible for a lot of transactions to happen. And that's where much of the growth in our industry has been seen, quote unquote, is through transactions. So over the last several years, there have been over 1,600 transactions completed across our industry. But I think it's so important to recognize, and there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some of that is already starting to support some advisors exiting either
Mhm.
in advance or at the time of the transaction. So there's a number of those when you talk about one third of financial advisors leaving the space or retiring in the next 10 years. Some of them have started the process and they've sold their business. They could have a succession plan going forward. Some of that is just simply people wanting to take advantage of the environment. And some of that are firms looking for that scaling opportunity. But what we're starting to see a little bit of is great, you brought a whole bunch of people in a room together, but are they doing the things to build the business going forward? And
Right.
that's the challenge that they're going to have to solve for now.
Yes. So there's a few muscles that have atrophied in the industry over time. One of them being exactly that. It's organic growth. Can we grow this thing without the benefit of buying up more firms or adding more advisors? And because organic growth, if we translate that into what that means for us, it means how do we attract the people that we can best serve and do our best work for them? Like, can we communicate that? Do they come to us for the right reasons? And a lot of firms have kind of let that slide, and now we're trying to have to reinvigorate that process. And it's not something you can just turn a switch and have it come on. So that was one of the original differences that Mark Hurley pointed out, is that in the future, that renewed focus on organic growth is going to happen quickly. And this comes back to the title of the piece, because it's going to be less of a club and more of a jungle. It's going to be harder to come by. And so you're going to have to be scrappy.
I actually kind of love that he said less of a club, more of a jungle. I hope the jungle still allows for collaborative opportunities, but
The collaborative space in the jungle. How do the tiger and the boa constrictor get along? Your jungles are happier places. Our next quarterly offsite, we're watching the Planet Earth documentary. Just want to poke some holes in this one.
I do appreciate that he said going away with a little bit of the club atmosphere, because our industry absolutely has that reputation, and you and I see it on occasion, feel it on occasion too, a little bit of the perception, sometimes not perceived, like backslapping that happens and connections. And that's always chafed at me a little bit when I've questioned, all right, but is the work being done?
Hmm.
We make sure that we're doing the work. Like
Yeah.
Top line, most important thing.
In a mergers and acquisitions environment, size was important, scale, get into $1 billion or whatever it might be. I think what Mark Hurley's getting at is this is going to be a competitive environment where the outcomes matter. Can you do the quality work? And are you designing your firm to do the quality work? If you have 50 advisors versus five, are those 50 doing the same quality of work as another size firm? Which I
Hmm.
like. I agree with you. I like the idea. That's why we started this business in the first place, is we wanted to compete and compete on our merits in an authentic way, and see how it goes. And I think that's what a lot of successful firms will have in the future, is competing on their own terms to say this is how we do it and building the business around that.
Well, and Dennis, I have to share too. One of the things that I really appreciate about you, and this goes back years and years before we ever formed this official partnership, when we had worked together prior to this. And I remember early on, you expressing your desire and excitement for helping to develop other advisors in this space and to be a mentor to people coming into the industry and helping them to get to a place where it could be a really, really fulfilling career and more families could be served. As we've launched Morton and Brown, that has been one of our goals. And that's a big piece of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I think that was the big epiphany. If you talk about kind of the arc, my particular career arc, when I was first brought into the industry to work as a broker, I thought the issue that we were trying to solve was fixing a client portfolio, or eventually kind of financial planning and everything else. But the more I learned about how the business runs, and just best practices and everything else, there's some industry wide things that could stand to be corrected. And I think it became more about mission driven, not fix the financial industry. That's a heavy lift, but just to make a dent and just have an impact. And I think that's one of the most effective ways that any of us can have an impact, is to, you're not a success unless you have successors, to
Hmm.
bring people into the business and help them to find their own voice, and hopefully succeed in working with more clients themselves. I think it's worthy.
Hmm. And it takes work. It takes work to build teams in this environment, in this industry, because historically it has been very much of a solo. There might be multiple support people helping different advisors, but it's not as often that you find a collaborative environment where advisors are helping one another to serve families and
Yes.
are helping one another to grow and develop in their role and to contribute, to the overriding higher goals of the firm itself. It's a process. And so when we talk about, being competitive, let's be collaborative in a team environment internally, but externally, let's make sure that we're out there and we're sharing the things that we do to help support families in their financial journey, and that we're competing against maybe advisors that aren't doing that same level of engagement with families or aren't being as proactive. That's, in my mind, that's where we're competing for a better or a higher level of service than perhaps some families are receiving.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think it comes back to the point of this white paper, is that oftentimes the business is the obstacle. That even if an advisor wanted to do more, the resources aren't there, or it's not prioritized, or whether it's planning or certain forms of investing, just the business model stands in the way. And when I read into this, I just keep saying it's about being a good advisor and running a good business. And we've been saying it for 6 years, since day one. Some of the other things that pop up, the differences in the future, things like artificial intelligence. How does that get incorporated? There's trends that are popping up, and we've talked about it. It's not going to replace having a great advisor. It's going to augment the advisory experience. It's going to augment the client experience. And I think that's really exciting. It's something we're looking forward to leaning into.
And there's been bits and pieces of that along the way. It's so funny how much attention AI is getting right now. It's morphing and evolving, I should say, over time. But there's always been elements of AI, not always. But for much longer than people may realize. When like the robo advisors came out, I mean, that's basically artificial intelligence. And I remember when some of the large firms started using platforms where you could just kind of plug in and they'd kick out an asset allocation for you and say, this is how you should invest your money, et cetera.
Right.
Like the conversation of a threat, all of those things, and even what's coming out now, as you said, I think the biggest and best use is to augment things that we are already doing and to help make it better. We don't have to reinvent it, but how do we make it better?
Things like onboarding, all those things where there's friction. Onboarding new accounts set up even just a few years ago was so paper based, and it was a workflow bottleneck. If I can start to make that easier and ease the friction, I think it makes for a better client experience. The running joke is going to see your financial advisor is a combination between marriage therapy, a visit to the dentist, and calculus. Let's get the visit to the dentist portion out of the way. I have a great dentist, by the way, and
I do too.
nothing against. This is not an anti-dental podcast. We're against a lot of things, not that. So
Just to kind of tie up this paper a little bit, we touched on some of these items already, but some of the traits that Mark identified to be a successful firm going forward, it really is coming down to creating those systems, like to attract clients and creating the operating model. We've said from the very beginning, how can we design Morton Brown that would best support the client experience that we want them to have? And when we think about things like AI coming into the mix, AI can help support, not take away from that personal experience that we'd like to build over time.
there's a lot of self-awareness that goes into this. They talk about decisive leadership, developing a powerful brand. Like we've spent a lot of time thinking about, what do we represent? What does any firm represent? Is your approach to planning something that's unique? Do you have a process that you follow? Value proposition? There's just a lot of this building self-awareness that I think, let's use the jungle scenario, where any business that's going into a place that's going to be less clubby and more like a jungle, it starts to have a lot of self-awareness on who you are, what you're trying to do, and who you're doing it for. And that's we've spent a lot of time in 6 years becoming more and more precise on that. And it's heartening to hear that that's going to be an attribute that hopefully will serve us well over the next 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And also accepting that the work is never done,
It
too.
isn't. Wait a minute. Wait, in 6 years, you've never told me that we're not going to be done.
Yeah. So happy
Oh,
anniversary to Morton Brown. I'm thrilled about that, but I'm even more excited about the next 6 years, 12 years, 18 years. I guess we'll start celebrating every 6 year anniversaries.
every 6 years, we just like party. Any reason to celebrate's fine. I like this discussion about the kinds of things that have defined the work that we've done or the environment that we're doing it in, and how that's starting to change a little bit. We like to bring some of that awareness in because there's a reason why we do the things the way that we do, and it's influenced a lot by what we're trying to get right in the culture of financial advice and what we're trying to hopefully be a positive change for. So Katie, just have a quick question for you, just something to think about. I don't need an answer it now. If you did had to name the most collaborative beast in the jungle, which one would it be? Is there one animal that you think really has those attributes that foster kind of creative enterprise between other animals?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm thinking it's a bird of some sort, like a toucan. I don't know, some sort of bird, because they get to see a lot of things, and I feel like they could like be a little messenger.
Don't elephants wash each other? Is that do they
I
do
think they
they
do.
do they? And I think they live in the jungle. We need we're
But do
wa-
they wash other animals? I don't think they wash other
I think
animals,
I
though.
think
Like, I'm
I think
thinking, like,
other.
what transcends from one type of animal to another?
Oh,
Otherwise, I would go with, like, orangutans or something.
how to like brush
But
each other's hair and everything.
yeah.
This part of the podcast is definitely half baked. We'll have to revisit that. All right, so
I have to get spun up on my jungle knowledge.
like I said, here we go. Planet Earth, next quarterly offsite. Here we go. David Attenborough coming at you. All right, so until next time, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Simply Why, a podcast about money and purpose. We hope you enjoyed getting to know us, how we approach leading a financial advisory practice, and the work we do every day to help families and couples make important financial decisions.
Morton Brown Family Wealth is an SEC-registered investment advisor. This podcast is designed for educational and informational purposes and not intended as investment advice. More information can be found at www.mortonbrownfw.com. By the way, for the record, I've had lawyers, guns, and money in my head all day. Like when we talk about discovery,
Classic.
have these conversations, like I had no idea you were as big a Warren Zevon fan as you are, and it just made my day.
We'll say I don't put him on all the time, but I don't ever turn him off when he is on.
nobody can be that snarky all the time. It's just